Hey everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful spring. In the spirit of renewal, I wanted to share something new that we've been working on. It's called the Nocturnist Plus, our new subscriber-only feed. With a subscription, you'll get access to the Nocturnist After Hours, a monthly bonus series featuring original conversations between me and our executive producer, Allie Block, along with discounts on our new merch and access to all of our episodes in one place. To give you a taste of what it's like, here's a clip from our very first After Hours episode, where Allie and I talk about the ups and downs of being the doctors in our own families.
It was my first experience where a healthcare provider was sort of using lines on me that I knew. So the biggest thing was he was trying to transfer my dad out of the neuro ICU. And I was trying to argue that he was not ready to go to the floor. And I'm sure you're very familiar with this line. This ICU doc said what we say to patients in the hospital all the time, which is, it's really much safer for your dad to be somewhere else. He could get an infection. He could get a DVT. And I was just like, don't pull that with me. I know those lines.
That's the Nocturnist After Hours. We're really excited to see how this series evolves. It's been really fun so far and would love to hear your ideas, questions, and suggestions along the way. If you want to join us in this new corner of our community, take a visit to thenocturnist.org/plus. Subscriptions start at just $10 a month.
Every episode of Trade-Offs is grounded in rigorous research.
The findings of this paper indicate
thoughtful conversations.
A lot of the anger, while real, is somewhat misplaced.
And insights into what the latest in health policy means for you.
Hey, we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars. What are we getting for it?
We tell stories that cut through the noise, uncovering the data and personal stories that help you understand the stakes to healthcare's toughest choices. Subscribe to Trade-Offs wherever you get your podcasts.
At The Nocturnist, we are careful to ensure that all stories comply with healthcare privacy laws. Details may have been changed to ensure patient confidentiality. All views expressed are those of the person speaking and not their employer.
This is The Nocturnist, and I'm Emily Silverman. Today's episode features Dr. Chris Carroll, a pediatric intensivist who got a call one day unlike any consult he had ever received. He had just dropped off his daughter at college and was driving home when the phone rang. On the other end was a veterinarian from the Jacksonville Zoo, where a Shigella outbreak had swept through a troop of great apes. They wanted help caring for a very sick patient, a 3-year-old gorilla named Kevin. Chris found himself stepping into a completely different kind of ICU, one with crates instead of hospital beds, aging units of gorilla plasma shipped on dry ice, and a veterinary team caring for their patients with extraordinary tenderness and craft. What stayed with him was not just Kevin, but the way the veterinarians spoke about him, touched him, and mourned him. In our conversation, Chris and I talk about pediatric critical care, what human doctors can learn from veterinarians, and how caring for one young gorilla changed the way Chris thinks about medicine. But first, here's a clip from Chris's live story, which he told on stage at a Nocturnist Satellites event, produced by Chest. Here's Chris.
I had dropped my daughter off at college and was driving home, and I got a call from a person who wanted me to see a patient. There was a patient, Kevin, who was 3 years old, had septic shock, was on norepinephrine and propofol, and they wanted a second opinion. And I said, sure, I'll come by and see him. I'd never been to this facility before. A security guard directed me around back. It looked like your typical medical clinic, maybe albeit one that wasn't quite as well funded. But one difference was when I walked in the door, there was a real thick, earthy, musty smell when I walked back there. Led down the corridor by several patient rooms. There was a room with what looked to be a sort of cat tower of some sort with, I think, a porcupine in it. There was another room with a large bird. I think it was an emu. And there was another room, the third room there was a tiger in the back corner. So I got to where Kevin was, and it was a big room. It was about a half the size of this room. In the middle of the floor, all by themselves, was a small aluminum crate or cage. It looked like a dog cage, only missing one side. And there in a nest of blankets, propped up, was Kevin. There you go, picture of Kevin. As you might have guessed, Kevin is not a human child. Kevin is a gorilla.
I am sitting here with Dr. Chris Carroll. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So what was it like for you to tell your story out loud on stage in front of an audience of peers?
I had been prepped by the team, and my coach, Kara, had prepped me that this was going to be an emotional and cathartic procedure. Procedure is maybe a bad word, but emotional and cathartic
Spoken
experience.
like a true ICU doctor.
Like an ICU doctor, yes. It was going to be an emotional experience to tell the story, and it was that. It was very emotional to tell the story on the after-hours stage in front of my peers, and one of my adult children was there too, which was really something. He has long been one of the performers in the family. He excelled in high school in speech and debate and in theater, and I got to hear lots of his performances over the years, and I think it was moving for him too to hear me perform in that way, because I don't think he had ever thought of me as someone who would do something like that.
Huh. What did he think of your performance?
He was very proud.
Great. Well, you are an ICU doctor. More specifically, you're a pediatric ICU doctor, which when I hear that, I'm just like, oh, that sounds so hard. But for a lot of people, it's their calling. So was wondering if you could share a bit with us about what brought you to ICU medicine, and specifically working with kids and critically ill children, and how did you get there, and what is that like?
Yeah. So I think that's true for a lot of us. It is a calling to go into pediatric ICU medicine. These are patients that are going to be there whether they're there or not. You have to think of it as a job where you're helping people. You're going in there specifically to help these patients and families. And there are a lot easier ways to make a living than being a doctor as well as an ICU doctor, and having that attitude that this is something I'm doing to serve these patients, to serve the world, to serve humanity. That's how I look at it. And I don't know how other people do it without that attitude. And I think a lot of the really good ICU doctors and nurses and respiratory therapists do see it as a mission to help people. As to how I got here, I don't know. I think sometimes we don't really realize why we're making the decisions we make, but in retrospect, it fit me very well. I really enjoy working with patients and families in a way that I don't know that I saw in my adult medicine rotations, and that was, really important to me. And then once I was in pediatrics, the ability to see real change and real tangible improvement in your patients, you can make a real difference real quickly. Patients get sick quickly and they turn around real quickly, and you can make a real difference in a pediatric patient in a real tangible way that was very appealing to me.
When I think about adult ICU medicine, I think about sepsis, heart failure, strokes, brain bleeds, things like that. What is the patient population like in pediatric ICU? Do you have a lot of kids with genetic syndromes, or how is the sort of disease profile or disease state profile different in peds? What are some common just types of cases that you would encounter in the ICU?
Yeah, that's a great question. About half of our patient days are made up of children who have some sort of technology dependence or some sort of chronic condition that brings them there. So children who have cerebral palsy, or maybe some brain damage that they were born with, or maybe some genetic abnormality that they were born with. But half of our kids are otherwise healthy kids who come in for the first time with sepsis, with a new onset brain tumor, with new onset stroke, with asthma, with other respiratory diseases, bronchiolitis, pneumonias. That's probably our most common acute illness. We see a fair amount of trauma in post-op surgical patients who have had some sort of surgical procedure, be that an airway procedure or something more invasive. There's a larger variety of patients, I think, than you see in adult populations, just because of that large population of children with chronic diseases that may not survive into adulthood. So we see a lot of kids with rare genetic diseases that, I will see something every week that I probably have not seen in a decade. So there's a lot of learning involved in pediatric ICU medicine as well, too, because you're constantly seeing new things that you maybe haven't seen in years. But, we still see a lot of the bread and butter stuff that adult ICU providers see too, sepsis and asthma and DKA and things like that.
So here you are working as a pediatric ICU doctor. And then one day you're driving home after dropping off your daughter at college, and you get an interesting phone call about a new patient, about a new consult. Tell us about that phone call and where it came from and what that was about.
So I'm not really sure how this person got my number. I think my wife is a minister in town, and I think that someone in her parish may have given this person my cell phone number. And it was a kind of unusual call. And I said, I think I can talk to you. Can I call you right back? And she said, sure. And so I called the chief medical officer of the hospital and said, hey, I just got this call. Can I talk to this person? And he said, yeah, just try to stay out of the news, Chris. And to try, I think, was an operative term. But so I called her back and talked to her a little bit about what she was doing and what they needed.
And who was she and what did she need?
I don't know how much I'll give away the spoiler. It was the head veterinarian at the zoo here in Jacksonville, and they were undergoing a outbreak of Shigella sepsis that had already taken the lives of 2 of the bonobos, and I think at that time 2 or maybe 3 had passed away already of the adult gorillas in the zoo. Shigella sepsis is something that rarely affects troops, but can be devastating. And they wanted some help. Specifically, they had a baby gorilla at the zoo with sepsis, and they were having trouble every time they tried to put an NG down the patient. He had a bradycardic near arrest, and they didn't know why. They also were concerned about the gorilla's abdominal distension, and that maybe he was developing a perforation and might need a surgeon. They wanted a lot of second opinions for things that they were already doing a great job on, which was interesting. And I think I have a reason for why they did that I discovered later, but they needed help managing the sepsis.
Did they ask you to come down to the zoo?
Not right away. The first day, they just wanted some help on the phone. And then the next morning, it was before 7 o'clock, I got a call that they had some labs that they had drawn overnight, and they wanted my opinion on the labs and what they should do.
Are the labs the same? Is it like a BMP and a CBC?
It was like a BNP and a CBC. The labs were surprisingly similar. And ended up, I think it was another couple of days before they invited me to come see the gorilla. It was a lot of phone calls and text back and forth the first day. And then as they got to know me, they said, well, why don't you come by? But yeah, the CBC is the same. The electrolytes are the same. How they replace electrolytes is a little bit different. The pharmacy is a little more bare bones than what we were used to in our pharmacies.
So you went down.
Yeah, so I went down.
And so you come into the zoo, like, it was at the zoo, or was it?
It was at the zoo, yeah. They have the area where we can see the gorillas, like a habitat, and then back behind that, they have a more private area where the gorillas will go at night, and they have more cages back there. But when an animal is really sick, they have to sedate them and bring them back to their hospital, which is another building. So it's a building apart from the enclosures.
So which part did they bring you to on your first visit?
My first visit, they had already sedated Kevin. I think they called it, they knocked him down, and they had brought him back to their hospital area. where they had other animals, and they had facilities like that they could put an animal by itself. And also they had, if you think of comparing this to a hospital, they had ward rooms where they could put animals by themselves and wouldn't need constant care. And then they had 2 large rooms, one of which was mostly set up like an operating room, and one was mostly set up like an intensive care unit where they could have a small cage on the ground or a larger cage if it was a larger animal. So they had what looked like a large dog crate, a large metal dog crate on the ground with 3 sides enclosed and one side open. And it was all metal, and there was like a little nest of blankets, and they had him propped up in there with an IV taped into his arm. In pediatric experience, this is something we're very used to, having to sedate children and as well as immobilize their arms to keep them from moving and dislodging their devices. So that was something I was very familiar with, but gorillas are stronger than your average 2 or 3-year-old.
So when you walk in and you see Kevin in the nest of blankets, are you able to just walk right up to Kevin and kneel and interact with him and talk with him, or kind of what was your interaction like?
I mean, if you were a braver person, you would walk right up to them and just start touching them and doing it. I was a little nervous having, essentially a wild animal in there. Mm-hmm. So I was a little more cautious and did not walk up to him right away and was, asking, is this okay? And I had to be prompted a little bit to go in there and help him. But by the end of the first visit, I was helping them do some chest physiotherapy and reposition his airway and how it helped them suction him. It's interesting. Gorillas have large canines like dogs do. I don't know if you have a dog, but if you've ever tried to give your dog a pill or some medicine, you can sometimes slip past a little gap in their canines there. And gorillas have that too. So you can slip a medicine in there with a syringe if you needed to. And you can't really do that on people.
And how did Kevin respond to you or respond to the team? Was he just kind of out of it, or was
he was
interactive?
Very out of it. No, he was very out of it. The first time I saw him, he was on a little bit of propofol, or it could have been Precedex. I can't remember which was the first day, but he was also on pressors at the time. He was on some norepi to keep his blood pressure up. So it wasn't very much sedation. He was quite sick the first time I saw him.
And then what happened? Did you keep going back?
Yeah. So at first, it was just a one-time thing, and then he got a little bit better that day. Once we were able to put an NG down, his belly decompressed, and we were able to replace some of his electrolytes and give him some fluid. And just with the time and the antibiotics, he got a little bit better. We gave him some FFP, which we were stretching the definition of the word fresh because they had it shipped in from around the country, and some of it was quite old, like years old.
And is it donated from other
animals? other gorillas? Yeah.
Wow.
So it's really interesting. One of the first things they said is, well, can we give him some albumin? And they said, no, that's human albumin. You can't do that.
Okay.
Okay, can't do that.
Good to know.
There is a gorilla in the Atlanta area that will voluntarily donate blood, stick his arm out, and they can get some whole blood from him. But other than that, you have to sedate another member of the troop and get blood from them if you wanted to do it. Veterinarians are much more hands-on than human doctors are, and we can talk about the differences between veterinary and human medicine because that was really what motivated me to tell this story. But they're much more hands-on, so they're doing a lot of the blood work themselves. If an animal passes away, they have to do the necropsy on the animal afterwards. There's not really a blood bank. They're spinning it down themselves and separating the packed cells from the plasma. So they're way more hands-on than the typical human doctor is. But over the next 2 to 3 weeks, he had some waxing and waning. When I told the story in After Hours, I condensed it a little bit, but we actually sent him back to his troop twice to see how he would do. Because, you either have the animal sedated in the back or being held in one of those ward rooms, one of those private areas where they can be hand-fed by a keeper, or you send them back out with the rest of the troop and hope things go well. Gorillas, they're primates. They're more social than a lot of other animals. So, they've got a large troop that loves them and cares for them in their gorilla way. And, we were hopeful both times that he would do well when we sent him back out. But he had some waxing and waning periods where he would get better and then worse as we adjusted his antibiotics and his fluids and transfused him.
So if you sent Kevin back out to the troop, the ways that you would know he wasn't doing well is what, he would just sit and not participate in whatever the other gorillas were doing, or?
Yeah, I mean, our hope was that the other gorillas would interact with him because he's still pretty juvenile. He was only 3 years old. So, he's not much more than a baby in the gorilla world. So that was our hope, but they didn't. He just kind of laid there on the ground and didn't really do anything. And the other gorillas kind of stayed away from him, which was disheartening.
Did it seem like they were rejecting him, or that they just didn't notice him, or?
The keepers, who are the ones who go in and do the major part of the interaction with them, they essentially raise these animals if they're born in the zoo, like Kevin was. They thought that they knew he wasn't going to get better. So they were.
They had like a predictive.
Yeah, they said they knew he wasn't going to get better, and they were distancing themselves from him.
Wow. Did he have a mom there?
He did. Yeah, his mom was there. His dad had passed away, but the Jacksonville Zoo still has the largest troop of gorillas in the country. And at the time that Kevin was born, there's not usually two main grown-up silverbacks in the troop, but there were in this case. And they kind of, I don't want to say they co-led the troop because Kevin's dad was much older, but wasn't really the leader anymore. He was kind of the grandfather figure or whatever. But the other leader of the troop, Rumpelstiltskin, he was there and definitely was a good paternal figure, even to the gorillas that he wasn't the biological father for. And Kevin's mom was there and still alive. And she was an experienced mom. She had raised another kid already, and I think was like 6 or 7 at the time.
And even she distanced herself?
She did not. Yeah. I mean, she would have been the one who would have spent most time with him, but she did not. Yeah, she distanced herself.
Okay. So you tried to reintroduce Kevin into the environment. It didn't quite work. And so then tell us what happened next.
So, I got a call about 4 or 5 in the morning that they had found him unconscious, like covered in flies and, just unresponsive. So ran over to the zoo. They had already intubated him by the time I got there. And, we don't know how long his downtime was. He had clearly had a prolonged hypoxemic ischemic event where he wasn't breathing properly. It was acidotic. So, when I got to him, he had a heart rate and blood pressure, and they were bag and mask ventilating him on the floor of the back area where the gorillas live. And, it was clear he had suffered pretty severe brain damage. His pupils were fixed and dilated. He didn't have a cough or a gag. He didn't have a corneal reflex. He wasn't responsive or breathing in any way. So it was clear he wasn't going to make it.
And were you there when he died?
Yeah, so I went back to the back area where they have all the cages. And there's little lines on the ground you have to walk between so the animals don't reach out and grab you. And, it's gorillas have a smell that's, you might remember if you've ever been to a gorilla house or some zoo where you've been to it, but it's a very pungent smell that's very gorilla, and since then, if I've been back to the zoo, I'm like, you can smell it amongst all the other smells. But all the other gorillas were around, and they were quite agitated and quite upset at the time that we were there and that potentially we were hurting Kevin or something was wrong with Kevin. I mean, they knew, even though they had ignored him when we came back and they had intubated him, it's not something they usually do back there. So they knew something was up. And I, ran through the brain death exam. I didn't do all the components, but it was enough he was going to have pretty severe brain damage. So as I'm doing this, the alpha gorilla, I don't actually think they call it that, but the head gorilla, or the leader of the troop, the big 400-pound gorilla, starts throwing himself at the cage. And they had warned me. They said, he's going to try to scare you.
So you're doing this brain death exam in a space where all the other gorillas
all
can
the other
see
gorillas
you?
are around you. Yeah. Oh, they're all around. They're all around us. They can all see us. They're right next to us. And the wall of the cage behind me is not even a foot from the other gorillas. And they said, just be aware, don't look him in the eye. And he's going to throw himself at the cage when you're in there because he's going to see you as a threat because he doesn't know you. So I went back there and sure enough, he's throwing himself at the cage when I go down and start touching Kevin.
What does that mean, throwing himself at the cage? Like
he is throwing all 400 pounds of himself against the wall of the cage.
Wow.
And, it wasn't like a jail cell, but it was some sort of plastic or some sort of support there. So he couldn't reach out and grab me, but he could throw himself at the wall and he could see me there. And that's what he did.
Did it feel like he was trying to get inside?
It felt,
or it was just making
I felt
a
like
statement?
a show. It felt like a show. It didn't feel like he was trying to kill me. It felt like, I just want you to know I'm here. And so you better not be doing anything bad to him. Yeah. So they asked me if this were a human patient, what would we do? And I said, if this were a human patient, we would bring him back to the hospital. We would have him on life support for a while. We'd keep doing everything we'd been doing for the previous 2 to 3 weeks. And there might be some hope for neurologic recovery. But given the fact that we were 2 to 3 weeks into this and he was continuing to get worse, there might not be neurologic recovery from this. He might continue to get worse. He might need a trach. He might need a G-tube. He certainly would need prolonged hospitalization before we figured out what was wrong with him. And by that, I mean at least another 3 or 4 days in the hospital. And that was something that's very challenging for them to do because keeping a gorilla sedated is challenging. During those 2 to 3 weeks, this is part of the story I didn't tell in the after hours, but they had issues with IVs, and there was a time where we had to bring some of our nurses in to put in a PICC line in him because they couldn't get IV access on Kevin. So I remember I sent a call out to our nurses, and I got more than a few. Are you serious, Chris? Is this a joke? Do you really need our help with a gorilla?
And somebody came and did the
PICC. Oh,
PICC?
yeah. We had 2 nurses come and put in a PICC, and they had ultrasound, and we were, using the ultrasound to do it, but it was still, he was sick. So his veins were not good veins. And plus he was a juvenile. So it's harder to get PICC lines in littler animals. But, this is something our nurses do all the time. And they're definitely better at PICCs than I am. So it was really not something that was feasible to keep Kevin alive for a few more weeks, given what had happened. And so she called up the head of the zoo and told her the situation and said that she recommended withdrawing support. So the head of the zoo said, just wait until I get there. So we sat there for another half hour bagging him for a while. The other gorillas settled down. And the head of the zoo, she got there. She was very sympathetic. And we explained what the condition was. And she, thanked everybody for all their hard work. And we agreed to withdraw support. And so we took the tube out and we took all the blankets and equipment off of him and left him there. So the other gorillas could see that he was gone. So they were right there with him. They didn't let them in the same cage as he was, but they could see him right there. They knew he was gone. As soon as we walked out, you could hear them howling for a while.
Howling, like all of them at the same time? Or?
No, but just crying. You could hear
Wow.
them crying. Maybe all at the same time. I mean, it was a lot like a human family would be, when
Wow.
you tell, I mean, we've all, any of us who've worked in ICU medicine knows what happens when you tell a family that, their loved one has died and they just start to cry. They just have a real expression of grief. And that was very true for Kevin's family as well. They just started to cry in a very human-like way.
And this is something that you've seen many times in the ICU with human families, just like you said, and to now experience it with a gorilla patient and a gorilla family, and you're in the zoo. And I mean, what was that like to jump from one species to another?
What really struck me in the whole experience of working with the veterinarians was the compassion and the humanization that they showed for their animals. And not just Kevin. I got to be on rounds with them a couple of times where, they run through the rounds on the morning about how the different animals are doing. There was, it was fall, so they were setting up the Halloween exhibits for the Halloween displays, and that was stressing out some of the animals. They were exhibiting weird behaviors, and so we had to talk about whether or not it was appropriate to medicate them and things like that. Or, a different animal was scratching at something and they thought that maybe it was infected and maybe we need to bring them back and take a closer look at it. But during that whole process, I was really struck at how they humanized their animals. They treated them all as, fully living beings, fully human, even though they weren't. They actively humanized them all and treated them with a love and compassion that I have certainly seen lacking in many of our care of our human patients. Yeah, I can elaborate more on that if you want me to.
Yeah. Like, was it the fact that there was more ownership, like they were doing everything, they were doing autopsies, they were drawing blood themselves? Like, was it more that they felt like they had ownership over the process, or? Some
of it was. Some of the connection, I think, was that they had raised many of these animals since birth.
So they're kind of like parents too.
They were serving a dual role of parent and caregiver. And I think a lot of the reason that they wanted me to be there is because they wanted to be sure that they had done everything they could. Because, the decisions they made, I think 99% of them, I didn't add a lot to the discussion. I was just agreeing with them. But they really wanted to know, well, what would a human doctor do in this situation? They wanted to make sure that Kevin was getting the best care for his sepsis. And, there was maybe a few times where I thought of something that they hadn't thought of or suggested something, a technique or approach. But a lot of times they just really wanted validation that they were doing everything. So I think some of it was that they didn't have the distancing that we do in human medicine. We distance ourselves. We're told from a young age, either explicitly or just non-explicitly in the hidden curriculum that we all learn from our mentees, that we have to distance ourselves, that we should not get close to these families. And one of the things that I learned was that, there is another way to do things. And, I said to the veterinarians that I worked with, and then the ones that I've continued to work with over time, that I'm still grappling how to put into words the difference in their in how they relate to their animals. Because I think some of it's shame that and I'll put me in that situation, that I don't always treat the patients with the compassion that the veterinarians would treat their animals. It's a busy day. We have lots of patients. We have lots of rounds to get through. I get it. Sometimes hard to spend those extra few minutes with patients and families. You want to be able to sit down and spend an hour with each family talking with them, but you don't always have the time to do that. And it was very different in the veterinary world.
I'm thinking about gorillas in the wild and gorillas in the zoo. Obviously, when you're in the wild, so you have, complete freedom in a sense. You're not limited to the campus of the zoo. And you definitely don't get a PICC line and intubated when you get sepsis in the wild.
Right.
You definitely don't develop close relationships with humans in the wild. You don't have to manage your reaction to Halloween decorations in the wild. And in the wild, probably Kevin would have died covered with flies right away.
Right away. Yeah. Or maybe they would have never gotten a Shigella to begin with. Or maybe.
Right.
Or maybe, I don't know. I mean.
Yeah. Or it'd have been something else.
Or maybe he died of something else. Right.
Or another animal would eat him.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a certain level of safety when you're separating the animals from each other. They're not going to be eating each other. And then in the zoo, of course, we think a lot about the cages and just the kind of moral aspect of that. But then there is this safety. They provide food. I'm sure there's a certain level of having that relationship with the human zoo team and, the exceptional medical care that was given. And so I'm just wondering, after this experience, like, how do you look at zoos and how do you look at animals in the zoo and thinking about like the human animal interface or the human animal relationship?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think certainly I wrestle with the concept of zoos like many people do. I think the idea of having an animal in captivity is challenging because, as you said, you certainly you could be making their quality of life worse in a lot of ways, despite all the caring and compassion that the zoo staff provides to these animals. I also think that zoos are important to teach people, particularly children, about the concept of the wide world out there. And going to a zoo and seeing these animals can foster a love for nature and for animals that it might not be possible to do without zoos. And, we will protect things that we love. And so maybe it is a good thing in that, this is
a little kitty cat.
This is my kitty cat. I could tell you about her in a minute. She's only got 3 paws.
Before your interaction with Kevin, were you an animal person, a pet person? I know for me, I didn't grow up with that many pets and animals around. I got a dog later when I was like in middle school, and that's a whole other story. It wasn't the best relationship, but there are certain people, I have people in my life who just have a really strong love for and connection with animals. And they're very attuned. There's like a nonverbal communication that's happening. It's something that I'm interested in learning more about and maybe growing myself in that way. Sometimes I'm afraid even to just pick up a dog or pick up a cat, and then they can sense that I'm afraid. And then when I reach for them, they clench up and then I clench up, and it's like this whole thing. But if you're easy and you're natural, and I don't know, there's just something really special about the human animal bond. And I'm wondering if that's something you had before Kevin, or if that's something that has deepened since.
I didn't really have that strong of a human-animal bond. I'd had a cat. When my children were little, we had a few animals, but none of them seemed to last very long. But I had a cat shortly after this experience. I did get this little cat. I don't know, this isn't not going to be videoed, but this is my cat, Zoe.
Beautiful cat.
Well, Zoe was, she's going to bite me. Doesn't want to be held. You're going down. There's a 6-lane highway not too far from my house, and my wife's driving to church one morning, and she sees this little animal on the road dragging itself across the highway and literally getting run over by cars, like cars are running over her. She makes across all 6 lanes of traffic. My wife takes a U-turn, goes and gets her. We estimated when we took her to the vet, she was about 6 weeks old. She had unequal pupils, was really small and emaciated. She has one leg that is paralyzed, doesn't move. And the vet said, this is sort of the dark side of veterinary medicine, is they said, do you want to take financial responsibility for this animal? Because otherwise we're going to have to put it to sleep. And the answer was yes. And $1,000 later, after the kitty head CAT scan and the blood work and the x-rays and everything else, they said, well, if it lives another couple, this is what I would do. But if it lives a couple of weeks, then bring it back and we'll see what we can do next. And, that was kind of it. If she lives another week or 2, bring her back. And we did that for a few weeks. And, the first week or 2, really month, she was either in a tiny little box with food and water and like a litter box area on the side, or we were holding her. She was so small. And now she's 7 months old and nothing stops her with 3 legs. She gets onto the highest areas of our house. She's proven herself to not be an outside cat because of her previous experience in the highways, but she is very resilient and she doesn't let anything stop her. She bullies her older cat sibling all the time.
Well, I think that's a good note to end on. Is there anything else you want to share with our audience about ICU medicine, pediatric ICU, veterinary medicine, Kevin, anything from the story to end on?
No, I think in the after-hours speech, I ended with a quote from the late Jane Goodall, who had recently passed away this year, that I think is a good quote to end on. We are all interconnected. People, animals, our environment. When nature suffers, we suffer. And when nature flourishes, we all flourish.
Beautiful. Dr. Chris Carroll, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. It was a really great experience.
This episode of The Nocturnist was produced by me and producer and head of story development, Molly Rose Williams. Our executive producer is Allie Block, and Ashley Pettit is our program director. Original theme music was composed by Yosef Monroe, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. The Nocturnist is made possible by listeners like you. If you enjoy what you hear and you want to support our work, consider subscribing to The Nocturnist Plus. You'll get access to The Nocturnist After Hours, our monthly bonus series featuring original conversations from our team, along with merch discounts and a full archive of episodes all in one place. Subscriptions start at just $10 a month. Learn more at thenocturnist.org/plus or through the link in the description. Thank you for listening and being part of this community. Until next time, I'm your host, Emily Silverman.